Welcome to Santai Senja, a podcast produced by the International Movement for a Just World.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Santai Senja. Today we are going to be talking about something closer to the Just family, which is the Just memberships itself and the members of Just who make up the organization. This is also in relation to the Just 30th, which is the Just 30th anniversary. And I won't take up too much of time because I believe our guest today, returning guest Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, our president of Just, will like to say a few words. And so I would like to pass the floor to Dr. Chandra. So Dr. Chandra. Yeah.
Thank you, Sana. Welcome everyone, dear sisters and brothers of the Just family, to this session of Santai Senja. We decided that we will look at membership on the 30th anniversary of Just, which falls on the 1st of August 2022. I shall begin by talking about various established features of membership, and then focus upon what I see as the biggest challenge that Just faces in relation to membership. And that will also introduce us to some of the larger global issues that challenge us at this point in time. It will be, in that sense, a very contemporary discussion. Now, becoming a member of Just is straightforward. It's not difficult at all. Anyone who subscribes to Just's core beliefs, which are clearly laid out in our brochure, is welcome to join Just. Just to state that they are committed to those beliefs, that's enough, above the age of 21, and open to anyone, any human being on earth. And we have observed those principles religiously over the decades. Just is a small organization in terms of membership. We have 300 over members. We've been around for, almost 30 years. And at the same time, one will observe that the Just membership is global, but not truly universal. They're Just members in about 40 plus countries in different parts of the world. The largest number of members are from Malaysia, but the Malaysian membership is about half of the total membership. The other half is non-Malaysian. And amongst the non-Malaysians, we have quite a few members from the United States. We have members from Britain, from India, from Pakistan, from Australia, and a number of other countries. You'll notice from the countries where there are few Just members, few in relation to our total membership, which is also very small. But if you look at those few in countries, United States, Britain, India, Pakistan, it is obvious that we have a sort of English-speaking dimension to our membership. And that's because Just's activities are all in the English language. We do produce things in other languages from time to time, but it is very rare. And this, I think, is perhaps a weakness. We haven't really reached out to the world, if you like, because the vast majority of people in the world are not English-speaking. But on the other hand, being an organization with an English-speaking membership, we are also able to play a global role, because the English language, all said and done, is the language of interstate, inter-community communication. It is, in a sense, a lingua franca of the world. But we do publish some of our materials in other languages too. Now, just membership, it's preponderantly Malay male, which is not something we're very proud of. We wish we had more female members. About 20% of our members or less are women. And in terms of its age profile, I would say on the average, though we haven't done a proper study of this, I must admit, on the average, I think the just membership would be in the region of 50 to 60 years old. That would be the average, which again is not something to be proud of, because if you look at the population of the world, you find that it veers more towards people who are younger than our average. So we are a deficit in those areas. Could have been better in terms of gender, in terms of age, categorization, and so on. There is this view that just as a Muslim organization, actually our demographics don't bear this out. We have a lot of Muslims. It may well be the largest religious component within Just would be Muslim. But it's not the majority. It is not the majority. We are people of all religious persuasions and people who are not part of any particular religious persuasion in Just, as long as they subscribe to our ideals. And our ideals do include commitment to God. But you see, that commitment itself is expressed in a manner that doesn't link us to any particular religion as such. It's global, it's universal. So these are things we have to clarify, because, there are people who have said that Just is only for Muslims. It's not true. We do have a multi-religious membership. I want to reiterate that point. And if you look at the issues that we have taken up over the years, the last 30 years, we've taken up a whole variety of issues concerning all religious communities. In fact, we have spoken up for religious communities that very few Muslim groups have spoken up for. And we have defended their rights. They've defended them as human beings. So in that sense, we are truly universal in terms of the issues that we articulate, the positions that we take, the causes that we champion. We're not confined to a particular community as such. Now that's by way of background, trying to understand what Just is. Now, what is our biggest challenge in Just? And this, I think, is very important because it's connected with our struggle. Our biggest challenge is this, as far as Just membership is concerned. Like people who are members of a global organization anywhere in the world, believe me, friends, Just faces this challenge that within a particular society, within all societies, citizens of different countries, they are less committed to what is global than what is national. They are more committed to what is within their own immediate environment. It may be the local community, it may be the state they belong to, the region they belong to, but the global dimension is not that strong. And that is also a challenge that we face. Why is it a challenge? Because it means that you cannot generate as much enthusiasm for global issues, even though you're supposed to be an organization that is international, an organization that is very, very committed to international issues. Yes, but you cannot generate that level of enthusiasm that people normally have for a national issue, for a local issue. And I remember seeing a study done a number of years ago and this was a study of attitudes within civil society in Britain. And that study showed very clearly that even in Britain at that time, and I believe it's still the problem, that the vast majority of people in different civil society groups, they had much less interest in global issues than in local issues that were part of the immediate environment. So this is a challenge that we face. And it's a challenge we've lived with for the last 30 years. How to generate enthusiasm for global issues. How to make people see, to develop this sort of awareness that the global matters, that international issues are very, very important. It has been difficult. Except, dear sisters and brothers, in the last few years, things have begun to change in terms of consciousness. It may not be reflected in the degree of enthusiasm yet, but I think it will be reflected in the coming years. But the change is happening. Why do I say this? Because if you look at the way in which certain global issues have begun to impact upon people within each and every country, I think people are beginning to see how important the global dimension is. One is climate change. Climate change is global. You cannot run away from it. You cannot talk about climate change as an issue that is just confined to a particular country. It is not. The underlying causes, its expression, its manifestations, its impact, it's global. Climate change. And yet another issue, perhaps even more dramatic in its impact upon people everywhere. The pandemic. COVID-19. There are many consequences emanating from COVID-19. We have ebook on COVID-19 that we have produced just. But we must say that this is perhaps something that we have not highlighted enough. That COVID-19 has perhaps made us more conscious of the global, of the international, how it affects all of us. You can't run away from it. You cannot overcome COVID-19, you cannot overcome pandemics of this sort by adopting a narrow national approach. It has to be global. Either everyone is free of COVID-19 or none of us are free of COVID-19. It's that sort of situation. COVID-19 has had a truly global impact. And people have become much more global because they know that you cannot just provide vaccines to people in one part of the world and ignore people elsewhere. It's not going to work because then you're going to suffer. You have to adopt a global approach. So COVID-19 as a health issue, and health affects people in a very direct way, has made us more global, more international in our thinking. We can't run away from it now. So that, I think, is something which will impact upon the just membership in the coming years, that people will become more enthusiastic about global issues. They will see what is at stake. They will understand the need to develop that sort of perspective on the challenges that confront us, including domestic challenges. They begin to see that the global dimension is very important. At the moment they don't, but I think that's going to change because of changes of this sort. And apart from climate change and this epidemic, which is still with us, one can argue that the most recent development in geopolitics has also made us more global. And I'm referring to Ukraine. It has also forced us to become more global, and therefore it is going to impact upon the thinking of our members and upon the thinking of people everywhere. How has this happened? How has Ukraine made us more global in our thinking? The two dimensions of the Ukraine crisis. Let us understand that the Ukraine crisis didn't begin just with the war. that is linked to 24th of February 2022. It has got a whole history behind it. And if you have that holistic perspective, that historical perspective, you'll begin to understand that Ukraine is also linked to economic sanctions. So economic sanctions, the war. These are the two major dimensions of the Ukraine crisis that impact upon all of us. Economic sanctions and the war as such. If you look at the economic sanctions, they began long before 24th of February. 24th of February, the accelerated sanctions, the Western powers accelerated sanctions upon Russia. But Russia was already under sanctions, don't forget, before the 24th of February. And the sanctions began after 2014, actually, after Crimea, after Russia took over Crimea, which is, of course, part of the old Soviet Union. And then they started imposing sanctions. So it has got a history behind it. And economic sanctions have led to a lot of suffering. And the suffering, especially after the more recent sanctions, the sanctions have impacted upon, the suffering has impacted upon people in countries that are so far away from the actual theater of conflict. It's just amazing, isn't it? Look at the sufferings of people in Egypt, in Senegal, in faraway countries that you would think has nothing to do with the conflict, but because they import wheat from Russia and Ukraine, and these are the two major producers of wheat, they are suffering. And the impact upon the global food chain is, of course, linked to the economic sanctions. And the economic sanctions is linked to the war. The war gave an excuse to enhance sanctions. We have been against economic sanctions, just as an organization, right from the beginning, for many, many years, because of the suffering they cause and because they don't achieve anything. If sanctions are meant to overthrow a dictatorship, as the argument often goes, it doesn't help. In fact, it strengthens the dictatorship. It's such a silly thing to do, to impose sanctions. And we have been campaigning against it, and we'll continue to campaign against sanctions as an organization. So, Ukraine, the sanctions dimension of it, it has also made us more aware. You have such a thing as global inflation for the first time. It's not inflation confined to a particular country. As a result of all this, sanctions amongst other factors, there is global inflation. Of course, the inflation at the global level is not just because of economic sanctions. It is also because of the manipulation of money. It is linked to quantitative easing and other dimensions of money flows, which would also explain the inflation. But the inflation again shows why things have become so global. You can't run away from these things now. You can't say, look, I'm not bothered about what happens in other parts of the country. If someone wants to print more money, it doesn't matter because it doesn't affect me. It does affect you. It affects all of us now. So whatever is happening today, whether it's the global economy, sanctions, money flows, whatever, it's got a global dimension. We have to understand that. So Ukraine, in that sense, has made us more aware of the global, from the point of view of economics, the inflation, the sanctions, and so on. And then the war. The war, we also know, as with all wars that we have had to confront, friends, brothers and sisters, as with all wars, they affect people everywhere, even though we're not aware of it. And in the case of Ukraine, it has been more direct, the impact. You can see it. Of course, it's Ukraine, people in Ukraine, of course, Russians, the soldiers in particular, also impacted by the war, and their families, we know that. But look at the countries around Ukraine that have been impacted by the war. Poland, Romania, Germany, a whole lot of them. But not just these countries. The war is linked, dear brothers and sisters, friends, to something that has been so much at the center of the just struggle. The war is linked to hegemony, the politics of hegemony. And that's what people have to understand. Why did Russia decide to invade Ukraine? Because of global militarism, because of military expansionism linked to hegemony. One important dimension of hegemony is military expansionism. And NATO was expanding its military power right up to the doors of Russia. And after 20 years, trying to persuade the Western powers not to embark upon this particular course of action, the Russians were provoked, which is the right word to use. They were provoked to react. Mind you, they were provoked. It's not a justification. It doesn't justify the war because, again, just has been against war as such. And we are against what Russia has done in that sense, going to war. While we know why it happened, we do not justify it. And therefore we say, look, stop the war. Just as we say, get rid of the sanctions. That has been our position. But anyway, I mentioned these things to show us and our members in particular, and those who are supporters of JUST, that our membership has to understand all these issues. They have to become truly global in their thinking. I mean, just don't read newspapers here and there and come to certain conclusions, which leads me to yet another dimension of this particular presentation. We would like our members to be knowledgeable. What is it that we look for in our membership? We want them to be knowledgeable, to understand issues, to overcome ignorance. Because I think part of the problem with the world today is ignorance. There's tremendous ignorance about global issues in particular, because it's linked to what I said at the outset, that people have so little interest in the global, so little enthusiasm for the global, so they're also very ignorant of the global. But what makes it worse is they come to all sorts of absurd conclusions without knowing what is really happening, like in the case of the Ukraine war. What is really happening? You can't get it from the mainstream media, so you have to go to the alternative media. And there are all sorts of alternative channels, JUST being one of them. If you don't mind me publicizing JUST, our website, where we carry articles from different dissident sources in particular. If you go to our JUST commentary, and if you look at other sources that we are linked to, whether it is Countercurrents or Transcend Media Service or Counterpunch or any of the other channels that we are linked to, we use their articles, we use the materials that they produce, we publicize them, we circulate them very widely. And there are many others which we don't use that often, like Information Clearinghouse and so on, which are all worth reading. So go to these channels. That's what our members should do. If you want to be a JUST member, it'd be a great advantage if before you even think of applying to become a member, you have some knowledge of the global issues, the real issues, the underlying causes, the real factors behind things, rather than just looking at global issues from a very, very narrow and often parochial perspective, which is what we don't want. We want people to overcome that. Not just Ukraine. You take a thing like Sri Lanka. I'm just amazed that people are so ignorant of what had happened in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, why? Oh, because of debts. Why? Because of debts? Because of China. It's so utterly distorted, that sort of view. Only 10% of Sri Lanka's debts were from China, 11% from Japan. Have you ever asked where the biggest percentage came from? It's from the IMF. And now the Sri Lankans are turning to the IMF. And the body which caused the mess that they're in is the IMF. Because IMF debts mean conditionalities. And those conditionalities actually killed Sri Lanka, apart from other reasons. Here again, not just the IMF. See, we need to have a broader perspective. Sri Lanka has had a whole history. It's a tragic situation, Sri Lanka. A civil war. For years and years and years, it had a civil war. Thousands died. That is what? sapped its dynamism as a nation. It was a very dynamic nation at one time, but that civil war, and apart from the civil war, ethnic problems that go beyond the civil war, that had lasted for a very, very long while, right from the mid 60s. It's a multi-ethnic society, where there are fundamental problems that have not been resolved yet to this day between the major ethnic communities in Sri Lanka. And so they've had to face these problems. And then the policies they pursued. The unfortunately countries like Sri Lanka sometimes, and this is something we have to keep in mind, they want to help the people. They want to adopt pro-people policies. Some of them are committed to socialism, but the way they interpret socialism leads to problems. It means just doling out aid to people. But if you don't have the base, if you don't have the economic base, you don't have a productive foundation to your economy, you will not be able to sustain this. You just can't dole out. Sooner or later, your economy is going to collapse. This is what happened to Sri Lanka actually quite some time ago because of this welfarism, superficial welfarism. I'm not against the concept of welfare. I am very much a supporter of that idea, and so is just. We very much support the idea of helping the bottom 10%, 20% of any society, which one of the great theorists of social justice, John Rawls, once argued that that is the way you would measure society's commitment to justice, what it does for the bottom 10% to 20%. That is the measure, yes. But how do you do it? How do you do that? Do you do it in such a manner that you have an economic base which can sustain it, or you don't have that sort of economic base? You'll be in trouble. So these are things which we have to understand. I mentioned these things, friends, brothers and sisters, as a way of emphasizing the most important quality one looks for in membership in Just. It is the desire to be knowledgeable, to understand issues. And global issues are much more difficult to understand than local issues. So just try to understand global issues, and now more than ever before, it is so important to understand global issues because the global impacts upon our lives much more than it did in the past. So one has to try to understand global issues. Read up alternative sources, not just those mainstream sources. More often than not, their whole purpose is to perpetuate the existing system that has caused all these problems. That's what they do, the mainstream newspapers and so on. So how can you understand the world by just reading those things? You won't. Or just watching TV and looking at television's interpretations of events and so on. For instance, just to take another simple example, this talk about who is going to be the next Prime Minister of Britain. It would be nice if they also told us a little bit about who these individuals are, what interests they represent, what they stand for. I'm sure some of you would be interested in knowing that this person from East Africa, in terms of his origin, Indian heritage, and so on, who may well become the next Prime Minister of Britain, Rishi Sunak. He was actually working in a major finance enterprise for many, many years. He was part of the famous enterprise is also very important to Malaysians because of its involvement in the 1MDB scandal. It's it slips my mind. You see how sometimes one's mind just doesn't. It's called. This is the one which is involved all the loans, the court cases, and so on. Oh dear, it's I'm sure people who are listening to us would know who the firm, the corporation that I'm referring to. It is. He was employee of that corporation for a very, very long while. So anyway, I just mentioned these things as ways of trying to understand issues, dig a little deeper, find out what's happening, and so on. So that is the outstanding quality that we look for. And apart from that, we look for people who are committed, who would do what little they can, because we know that we've all got jobs to do, we've got various other commitments, tasks, and so on. We can't give much time to voluntary activities of this sort, but if we can, that'd be a great blessing. Yeah, we can give a bit of time, commitment, be honest in what one does, show integrity in one's work, and that would be good. And we are very happy, I must say, though we haven't achieved much, but over the last 30 years, with the membership that we have got a committed core, we've got committed staff, and that's the reason why I think we've been able to carry on all these years. And the committed staff, some of them are also members of Just. So this is the strength as far as our membership is concerned. Let me end this presentation by talking about a member who passed away, and we didn't record his passing away because we're not aware of it, which is very unfortunate. Every time someone passes away, it is something that we record, we remember the person, all the rest of it. We did it in the case of Mr. Hansen.
Yeah. No Hansen.
No Hansen.
Yeah.
No Hansen was a member for many years. He was from Denmark, became part of Malaysia, a Malaysian citizen, married a Malaysian lady, and he had children here, and so on. And he used to attend all our functions very regularly, and he was around. He was a person who was, in that sense, part of our of the Just features. He was part of personality, and he contributed in his own way, giving ideas here and there, and so on. Though he didn't hold any office in Just as such. And over the years, something like 22 plus in the last few years, a few others, maybe over 25 Just members have passed away.
Yeah.
The other person who passed away recently too, but we had honored her, is Prof. Buang,
Wow.
yes, she was a lecturer at the University Kebangsaan Malaysia for many years, which was now Exco. She was very active and so on. And she also passed away, a few years ago, but we at least managed to record her passing away. And John Burusami, some years ago, was also very active. People like Osman Ibrahim, who was our treasurer, was a great asset to Just. Passed away in 2010, and yet another person who passed away was Gantik Chi, who was one of the founding members of Just. He was a great pillar of strength. Just was always the exco, and he used to write, speak, network, mobilize, did all the things that were important. He had passed away. And also, over the years, people like from the early years, Adil Hussein, an activist from Egypt, and we also had, I think, others who had passed away over the years. I'm just looking at Just 20 to remember some of the individuals who had passed away over the years, and here's remembrance of them. And Muzaffar Tate, well known within Malaysian circles, he was a writer, especially students and teachers would remember him, because he wrote a lot of school books and so on. The late Tan Sri Dr. Noordin Sopi was a member, and a very well-known Malaysian personality, one of our leading intellectuals. He was also in Just, passed away. Dr. Kamil Arif, medical doctor, he was ardent supporter of Just. People like Professor Daniel Leff, A.M. Jaffa, Daniel Leff, from the United States of America, well-known specialist in Southeast Asian affairs, a well-known pediatrician by the name of Dr. Sam Abraham, a youth activist who was in one of the political parties, a very bright chap, died very young, Adnan Benan Umar, and former civil servants, Saada Din, people heard that, and yeah, uh, yes, quite a few left the world, but we remember them and what they've done for us. Just would not be what it is without all their contributions. Um, so let us end on that note, because I think that is a befitting note to end this presentation. The contributions, the services performed by people who are associated with us. And we can only build a future if we remember the past. And we can only sustain the present if we honor those who came before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. That was very, very insightful, very enlightening as well. And I believe that for myself, the takeaway on this one is that when it comes to also understanding what we want for the Just membership and for society in general, we want people to become more knowledgeable. And Just serves as a good function, also bringing all these people of various different backgrounds in a common moral foundation together, a common understanding together. So, for those who want to seek a way to engage with like minded individuals who share the same now new approach to global outlooks, the new approach to understanding how we fit into the international order, into international society itself. I believe just serves as a platform for all of us to engage together. So for those who want to join us in the Just family, you only have to reach out. We have the website, we have the Facebook. So please feel free to get in contact with us. There are so many people here who have so many different knowledge and different backgrounds and give so many different global perspectives on the world as we understand today. So this is my own personal call for my fellow youths and for our fellow youths to also teach future generations on why it is important to seek a global outlook, to understand our place in the world today, but to also come together so that we can make better tomorrow as well. Thank you very much, Chandra, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.